Hey, my name is Darius and welcome back to Founders Unchained, the show where we sit down with founders, builders, innovators, and also investors. And today we have Vytenis, who is the co-founder of BCCS Cluster. So pleasure to meet you here in this show. For people who don't know you, can you just explain about yourself a bit, give us a little bit of background, what you do, and then most importantly, how you can help startups?
100%. So thanks, Darius, for having me. A quick, background, who I am, what I do. So in, the startup space, in the cluster space, I started around 2019, if I'm not mistaken, with my friend that we started a BCS Cluster. So it all went uphill from there, if I could say. Other things that, from my perspective, what I do and work with is startups, but not only. It's also the cluster that I mentioned a few sentences before. And what we do within the cluster is we gather a bunch, of companies. I believe we're around 17 companies, expanding. And what we do within the cluster is we facilitate communications, and we are, the ones that try to, not really influence the industry, but have the small players, the cluster members, go to the industry that's fintech, Web3, cybersecurity, where we go as one, not as many dislodged members or companies, but we like one strong fist that we go and try to build something, to try to offer services, and just instead of being, as I mentioned, a random simple small company that doesn't have the strength to really push through. We were like a wave, if I could say, in a good sense. Myself, the background, as I mentioned, I'm a founder currently, and probably what we will be talking more about today. Also, I'm quite deep, if I could say, within the cluster, is with EU projects. Also, another things that we do, startups, we're building with AI. So it's quite a lot. I'm not sure if I can start explaining everything right now. I guess we'll go into it a bit more when we talk a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, as I understand, you are basically doing business in fintech and Web3. So, this is your main target group of clients. So, in terms of BCCS cluster, as I understand, you work collectively with all the members. You trying to do good things for the customers as a team with all the members. So, speaking about the members, so as I understand, you have multiple and different expertise in place. So, can you just share a couple of examples when you, with a team or your members, you was implementing one specific project?
Yeah, sure. So usually how it works is, when you're talking with a startup, for example, a blockchain or free startup, let's say a crypto company, startups have what? An idea, right? But they need everything else. They need the funding, they need the software, they need, if it's a fintech Web3, now they need a lot of licenses, right? So they have to start somewhere. Usually they start with the idea, then they're trying to acquire some funding, maybe do some POC. And so basically this is where we come in, is when you're a startup, we can basically, the cluster can help basically from the very beginning of your startup, because we have members within the cluster that can help with fundraising, can do software development, can help with licensing. So instead of going to, let's say, 3, 4, 5, 6 different suppliers, or to big companies that can do everything, we have everything, let's say, in house within the cluster. And instead of, as I mentioned, having 5 different 6 different agreements with 6 different companies that do something in their own way, we have something that works, because all the companies within the cluster, we know them quite well. We've been working for them for quite some time. So we know the ins and outs of the companies, how they work. That's why we can offer a faster delivery, if I could say, a better, let's say, sense of having that single point basically of contact, where you talk with us, and then, we say that, okay, these experts are here, they are good for, let's say, fundraising, these are good for software development, these ones can help out with certain issues with licensing. We basically guide them, consult them, to reach, their desired objective, to launch the startup, to maybe scale up. They want to go to a new, let's say, country and establish there, we can help with that. So, it's basically, we're the people within the cluster, we can help out in all the sorts of ways. in the way that we can help you is we have to talk with you and see how can we help you, basically.
Okay. And speaking about your region where you operate, it's mainly Lithuania, or it's also might be like players from global market who are coming to you?
So it really depends through all those years, when we're talking about Web3 and crypto, especially, it's the whole world basically. At least in the, if I could say, the good old days, a few years back, definitely clients from all around the world. But now we mostly focus for the fintech Web3 side of things, cybersecurity, mostly focusing on the European market and of course local Lithuanian markets.
So, Vytenis, I know that we touched, about BCCS Cluster in this conversation previously, but, can you just explain what is BCCS Cluster in plain English for people who didn't hear about you?
Sure. So quite simply, when people talk with me and ask, what is BCCS, what is a cluster? If I go to the original roots of the clusters in the beginning, if I could say, geographically placed, let's say, group of companies that are individual companies that use, like, for example, the same infrastructure. A good example in the cluster book is, you have like the wine clusters in Italy, where you have, regions, they grow their grapes and they do the wine, they use the infrastructure and everything. So it's a big conglomerate, which is the original description of a cluster. So a lot of companies working in the same industry, all sharing the same infrastructure. We're digital, we're small, but we're not the cluster in that sense that using, let's say, the infrastructure. We're not a vertical cluster. We're a horizontal one. So BCCS cluster, in that sense, we're a small cluster, and instead of those big old school clusters, we're not based geographically. We're not all doing the same thing. We're not, as I mentioned, the wine cluster. We're not all growing grapes. We're a vertical cluster where each member does something unique. We have members that can help with software development, can help with cybersecurity, can help with fundraising, tokenomics, marketing. So what we have within the cluster is the whole scope of services dedicated to the fintech, Web3, cybersecurity sectors. Well, in broad terms, even we can say digital. In plain terms, a cluster is not like an association. What usually people come to me and say, oh, a cluster is like association. So it's not an association. It's governed by a joint activity agreement, basically, which means there's individual, independent entities working for the same goal. And us, as the cluster managers, we try to manage it. We do events, we have a website, we have actually, we're building a platform that will be launched where you have even more opportunities to communicate, to share experiences. But that's still in the works. Give us a month or two to release it fully. But this is basically what it is, a cluster. But one misconception that I usually see is we talk about cluster, we talk about, going to the clients, having a better offering as a cluster. But usually what people think is, oh, this is like a sales channel, but this is not a sales channel. It's the opportunities that arise as a cluster, because one member might have a client that needs some additional services, and those additional services can come from the cluster members. As the cluster community, if I could say, it's quietly, closely knit together. We say, okay, go, maybe we can go together with a few cluster members, have the service offering, but we do not do sales. Misconception that some people have is, this is like a sales channel, but we do not do sales. It's a nice opportunity, but what we do is we facilitate the communication, we facilitate the exchange of knowledge, what's happening with one cluster member, another cluster member, what we can do, basically together, what we can do better.
So, Vytenis, thank you for clarification and explanation. To sum up everything, you are as a gateway for somebody who wants to solve some specific issue. We can come to you and we can get any kind of solution or services or help and support from one hand.
Yes, 100%. Maybe what I didn't mention or clarify, we are, as a cluster, we are service providers mostly. But now we're expanding, we're increasing, the community aspect of it. We are not looking only for service providers for those specific industries. We're also wanting to broaden the community, which means, have the companies that we provide services to, have the startups that work within these sectors, fintechs, Web3, all of that. And basically broaden the community. We don't want to have some big walls or issues where, we cannot come to join the community. We would love to have a broader range of startups that facilitate and work within those industries. Well, to summarize it very, very plainly, it is a community for the industry.
Okay. So for people who will be watching this, if we would like to reach out to you, what is the way how we can get in contact with you?
Probably the most simple one is through LinkedIn. Also, you can go through the BCCS website, bccs.tech, a short URL, and also my email. That would be, possible to reach me, which is my name dot my surname at bccs.tech. If you're a startup interested to know more about the cluster, maybe want to join the cluster, give me a call, give me a message.
Okay. And by the way, today, as you see a lot of VSPs companies in the market where, solving this specific issue to get the licensing, which is CASP licensing under the MiCA regulation. So just for my understanding, if somebody needs to get some support and help in terms of getting CASP licensing, so can you help with that also?
Of course. Again, it depends. We do get these requests. We see if we can help them. It depends where they want to be established. Sometimes they want to establish somewhere in Europe. There's a bit differences. If someone comes to us and wants to get the CASP license, we'll see which is the better, let's say, place to do it for them, or how can we help them. And even if we do not, for example, have the competencies within the cluster, maybe they want to establish somewhere else, we do have a very big partner network that we can, point to the right direction, say, okay, do the introductions, talk with him, talk with her, and see if they might help you out. If you have questions, come to us, let us know, what's the issue you want to solve, and then we can see how can we help.
Yeah, so that's actually good to hear that it's not just only things what you do in-house in BCCS cluster you can help with, but you also can help with like extension of a network globally, just in case if somebody needs to solve something what you cannot do. So you can help with business development in more extent. If we would come back, a little bit back in the history, from where this idea came from originally, do you remember that day, why you decided to build it? Did you see any gaps in the market or very serious need for that in the market?
Let's say the cluster initiative started around 2019. There were definitely clusters before that, but it's, let's say, a sum of few things that happened that's beneficial. So back in those days, there were a lot of government incentives to establish clusters. And so it happened that, we had a few partner companies that we worked with quite some time. I believe the founding number of members was around 6. And we saw the opportunity that we all work within the same industry, so fintech, and at that time a little bit of Web3. We saw the growing opportunity and the government incentives, because the national governments and the European governments were very, very, let's say, big on clusters at that time. So there was a lot of incentives, funding, and that's how we saw. Okay, we got together with the partners and said, what? Look, there's this initiative. The Europe wants to see clusters. They want to build those clusters. We are 6 companies, but we can grow. Let's start the cluster and see what happens. So basically, that's what happened. We started the cluster. We initiated the cluster. It was all good. Then the crypto boom started. It was all good and fun, and that's basically how it started. Now we pivoted a little bit. We expanded. We're doing more, as I mentioned, fintech. Also, a little bit more of Web3, cybersecurity. And we're growing. We're not growing as fast as we wanted. There's always hurdles in the way, but the future is quite bright.
Can you also explain, how does the cluster actually function day to day and what kind of events you're organizing? Because you was mentioning that you are very active with community management. So I believe you have events, so organizing them. Can you just elaborate on that?
Sure, Darius. So, yeah, we're doing events. Actually, yesterday there was this event called Code Red that we do, which is a very, at least to me, an interesting event that it is a simulation of an incident in a fintech company. So what we do is we create a fictional fintech company. We invite members of the fintech community. And currently now, for example, we have 5 positions. So CEO, CMO, CTO, CISO, and the legal team. 5 tables basically, and we have experts from different companies sit at those tables, and then we do a simulation. We have a company, an incident happens, and we want them to solve the incident. And it's very interesting how they solve the incidents, because we I believe we already did like 7 or 8 of these events with a few different scenarios, and each time, if even if it's the same scenario, the outcome is completely different. What you see is, the real problem solving that can happen within a company, and how actual people can influence the decision. Let's say thing that we see is usually the main issue in all of these events is communication, because the information doesn't travel as it should. Maybe someone forgets to read something, maybe someone forgets to say something. So it's a very, very fun event with a lot of smiles, a lot of laughter, and a little bit more. So that's one event of what we do. But we also do monthly events for the members. It's usually a monthly meeting of the BCS members, where we try to see what's happening within the cluster, feeling the pulse of the cluster, trying to gather some outside sources, experts, to talk a little bit more on certain issues. We also have initiatives where, okay, if you're a cluster member, maybe bring someone from outside. Basically, as I mentioned before, it's all about communication and gathering of the community, because what we see is, with more people you can do more, basically. We also represent the cluster in various international conferences. Well, we try to not go only ourselves, but also take the cluster members with us, have a stand in those conferences, and you see, how can BCCS and the BCS members can, improve, establish, go and see what's happening in all around, actually, mostly Europe. Various types of events that we do.
If I understand the BCCS cluster, you can support many startups and companies, who wants to solve some specific issues and problems. But in the same time, I'm curious to understand, what it takes to be able to join your community or BCCS cluster as a company, let's say. So do you have some requirements for them, some specific requirements? For example, you was mentioning marketing experts in place. So if I'm running marketing agency, is it possible for me also to join the community if you already have a partner, who helps with marketing?
Yeah, good question, Darius. To be honest, it was quite difficult to join the cluster before, but as I mentioned, we're shifting a little bit now. What we want is, we want the members, we want to expand not only locally here in Lithuania, but in Europe as well, and probably be even further away. But to join the cluster, it will be quite simple. As I mentioned, we will have a platform in place, a dashboard, a platform where you can just register. There are 3 tiers of cluster membership. First tier, the bronze tier, is just you register on the platform, and you can see what's happening within the cluster. You're a member, you're a not paying member. There's then the silver membership, where we give you more things and benefits from the cluster, events, member only events. So the list is quite big. This is the paying membership type that you have to pay. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, it's around 100 euros per month. And then there's the gold membership, which is not so easy to become a gold member, but because it is for the dedicated members, dedicated active members of the BCCS community that already are members for quite some time. So it's a bit different. So we want to have give the gold membership not to everyone, but to those members that are active, that are actively participating within the cluster, and basically those that want to make the cluster more than it is right now.
Okay, got you. By the way, Vytenis, I also heard that you are very heavily involved in EU grants. You know how to do it, how to get funding from EU. Can we touch a specific point, what to basically do right now in terms of EU grants? And maybe you are trying to get funding for your own projects internally in BCCS cluster, or you can also help for the customers to get the grants. So how does it work?
Sure, great question, Laros. So EU funding, it's a whole different entity on itself. So we have different types of funding. We have the EU dash national funding. It's a very broad spectrum, of possibilities for the funding. There's different initiatives and everything. A few main ones when we're talking most about European funding is, you have the Horizon Europe, you have Digital Europe, you have various Cascade funding. Maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later. And there's the currently now big defense spending funding. It's called European Defense Fund. These are the biggest funding schemes in Europe. We go there as potential beneficiaries of the grants of the consortiums, because just to give a quick maybe a little bit more on what's the European funding. It's equity free. You get some funding intensity from Europe, let's say from 50% to up to 100% depending on the call, and usually you have to go there not as only a single entity, but as a consortia of three or more partners from three or more European or related countries. This is how Europe wants the European companies to collaborate together. So basically, if there's a call, for example, a fintech type of a call where you have to do something for the fintech industry, let's say, you might have one that does software development from Spain, another that does cybersecurity from Netherlands, for example, and some sort of entity from Lithuania does something else. Three is the minimum. Usually, you can see consortiums with 10 or more partners. So this is a very, very different path that you have compared, to the startup community. But, I see as startups, there's definitely potential there. So yeah, that's the European funding. We can go definitely dive a little bit deeper there.
Yeah, but definitely for sure, it might be interesting. As you know, my YouTube channel is being watched by many startup founders or people who wants to build something or planning to do so. For them, this kind of information might be very useful. Just to go more deeper into that, if I have idea as a startup founder, how I can actually use this EU grant, and do you see any opportunities for the startups actually what we can use it right now, at this moment?
Good question. And everything you said, Darius, is actually, if I could say, impossible. That's the beauty
Impossible.
of it. That's the
Is possible or impossible, you said.
it is, you said right now, and I should point out that European funding is anything but right now. If you're a startup founder, European funding is usually takes quite some time. You have to find a consortia, you have to write a project, then it takes around 3 months, or usually longer, to get the if your funding is approved, if your project is successful, then it takes another like 3 months to finally get some sort of initial funding, depending on the type of funding and everything. You can get some pre-financing, but we will not go into the details here. But if you're a startup, you have just an idea, European funding is not free. But if you're a startup that already has something established, has something running, has some initial funding, and maybe already has something that is working, some not a POC but already a viable product, then you can go to the European funding and see, how can I improve this product? What other functionalities I can add through European funding? Really boil it down to the essentials. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but you see how can you improve your product. As I mentioned, add other functionalities. As European funding, as I mentioned, it's equity free. Usually it's some sort of intensity to, an example, develop for your product some additional functionality. So they will give you, for example, 50 or
Okay.
75% of the funding to develop your tool and offer it to the European market, because Europe funding wants you to develop it, and how can you use it and give back basically to the European community. So European funding is perfect. It's good. Usual misconceptions what I see is, that it's just too much. You will not get the funding. Yes, most of them are correct. It's not easy, but when you get that thing rolling, then you can really, leverage the European funding to develop your product. But just to point it out, it's never fast. It takes time. If you consider as a startup to get some European funding from the European projects, European Commission projects, well, it takes at least, let's say, a year. But usually, when you're just starting, you might be dry for a year or two without any projects. It really depends, at least for us. our first project started coming in after 2 or 3 years after trying and trying and trying. So again, it really depends. We didn't do everything, in the correct way, but now we see that, it's starting to ramp up, and, we definitely see the benefits here within the European funding on how they help improve our service offerings, our products. Then, it's a different beast.
I got to the point that, the early stage founder who actually just only have idea, this is not the best way for him to go. I'm just curious, for example, if I'm sort of a company which is already exists, we have some MVP in place, maybe potentially I have a couple of clients, maybe I'll generate some revenue. So what you would advise for such a founder, how to make sure that I will be super efficient, with application in order to get the funding? Do you have any specific advices for those people? What they should do in order to avoid some mistakes or to, let's say, postpone their funding?
Main mistake what I see is people do not put in the enough effort into those calls, because this is a big pool. New calls comes out. There's a lot of different calls that you can possibly join. Sometimes you have to, as a, let's say, founder or as a company, you have to look a little bit, what can I do for the call to make it successful, in sense of what I have as a service or as a product. So the main thing is not trying, right? So you have to try. To be successful, you have to try, sometimes more than once, sometimes more than twice, and even more. But in the end, you get the connections from the Europe. If it's not successful, the application that you give, yes, it took some time to write. You made some quite good connections throughout Europe with your consortium partners. And what we see is even after an successful applications, there's incentives to try again with the same consortium. What I see is that through the European calls, most of our calls, as everyone's, were not successful, but it built a very big partner network through all across Europe. I do say that, if you're a founder, you go try, participate, see what's happening, how Europe is looking at all these funding opportunities, and what's the pillars on what they want to do as Europe. Usually they're, quite big incentives, packaged into smaller calls and everything. I forgot to mention, there's the cascading calls, which is the smaller grant based type of calls that usually the big European calls, some projects win, and what they do is they give the project basically funding to fund smaller projects, if that makes sense. So that's
Yeah,
what
yeah.
cascade funding. These are smaller grants, usually easier to get, usually require less paperwork, usually easier to win. But then again, there's, if it's easier to apply, there's a lot more companies applying. But what I'm saying about cascading, those smaller cascading funding, is that you can usually, again, it really depends on type of call and the cascading funding, on what you can, the entry point is lower, in a sense that you do not have to be some big company or have a startup idea, and you can basically go there as a smaller entity. But then again, it depends on type of call. As a service, if you're someone that offers services, a startup that offers services, there's definitely, for example, different calls for cybersecurity experts. And if you have some sort of a cybersecurity tool, for example, you can go and access the Cascade funding, try to win the Cascade funding to do some sort of development on your tool, or use the tool to do various cybersecurity, let's say, aspects, developments.
Okay, so thank you. This is something interesting. I never heard about the cascading funding. So as far as I understand, the cascading funding is being issued for such entities like incubators, accelerators. That's right? Because I know that accelerators, incubators, we support startups by giving small grants like 5,000 euros or something for validating of idea. For example, we have in Lithuania First Pick. We actually support with grants, small amounts of grants, but it's very beneficial for a startup. So this is how we get the capital in order to give us capital to the startups. Is that the same thing, like cascading funding?
Yes, but a bit different. When you have an incubator accelerator, it's usually private owned, funds and everything that, look for startups and then give the funding. So this is European type of, let's say, accelerator. So just to put it in plain terms, there's a call from Europe, let's say for our Cascade funding, they say, okay, we see there's a lot of fintech development, small fintechs that lack funding, for example. We have these issues. We want the companies that apply to this call do this, and that. And basically, what they do is they apply to the call. They say, we will manage the Cascade funding. And what happens, an example, let's say, is the call is like 10 million, let's say, and they give 5 million of those 10 million for Cascade funding. An example. Of course, the numbers are different. What happens is that you basically create through the European entities in the consortium an accelerator for companies to give out the funding to smaller entities, if that makes any sense. So
Yeah.
it's in like an accelerator where European Commission gives a certain amount of funding and says we see a lot of smaller fintechs with free companies, well, any industry can be manufacturing, energy, it doesn't matter. And see, we want you to manage the funds, create so sort of a incubator accelerator where you, under certain circumstances, let's say, you give out the funds to the smaller company.
Okay. And can you advise the people where we can get the information about this European funding? Do we have any specific, portal where I can go and get all the details in one page?
Yes, so it's the funding and tenders portal for the European Commission. I don't remember the exact URL, but it's funding and tenders portal. There's pretty much all the funding that's available is listed there, and you can actually apply through there. Cascade Funding usually has their own websites, but most of the information is there. This is where you start, and then you see, where it basically takes you.
Okay. And for my community, just for my curiosity, if somebody would like to get assistance on EU funding or get your advice directly, is it okay for them to reach to you out?
Sure, sure. If
Cool. That's great.
usually what happens is, as I mentioned, very rarely you go there as a single entity.
Okay,
Usually,
cool.
it's three entities from three different European countries. If you come to us and you have an idea, usually what happens is we see if we can be part of the consortium. If we can't, we can't. It's all good, but. I mean, if there's any questions, related to European funding, definitely reach out to me. We can talk more and see, if the European funding is something that can help you out as a founder or startup.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So please, people who will be watching this episode, don't be afraid to ask Vytenis for help, because in my understanding, sometimes this is the best way to go. You just need to find experienced people who understand the topic, and we can actually help you a lot just to save your time. Maybe we can give you a quick, really good advice, what can save even money in most of the cases. So thanks for sharing this with Dennis, and
Yeah,
really appreciate that.
it's time intensive. To start on European funding, usually it's time intensive, but then you get the connections, then you get the partnerships that also usually work with the European funding, and then it just speeds up incrementally.
Yeah.
And sometimes logarithmically it just goes up because you already know companies that work with European funding, they know how to write the projects, they know what to do. So it just becomes easier and easier. For us, it was the same story. We started slow, but then it got faster, and now we're applying to projects. I wouldn't say once a month, but at least once in a quarter. So
Yeah, so it's quite you are quite expert at this with such amounts of
now I can
projects.
say that I'm quite experienced, but there's still a lot more to learn.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks for sharing that. Vytenis, can we also come back a little bit back, speaking about the narrative? So what are the most trending narratives right now when we speak about EU grants? Can we just go more into the details? You was mentioning the defense sector and many more. So can we just come back to that and just to discuss about the specific?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, this funding type is slow to get, and the trends they do not shift as fast as in within, let's say, the private sector. Usually, there's years that they plan so sort of incentives. For example, Horizon Europe is 7 years, if I'm not mistaken, from 2020 to 2007, where they build on what they want to see, but each year they upgrade, they see how can we shift some trends, but it doesn't shift as fast. It really depends. Europe is going green in 2050, So now there's these incentives, the long-term incentives, and these types of funding try to, steer it in a little bit in that direction. Almost all the funding and the calls, they say something about, sustainability. How will you implement this? Gender equality plans, all that's interested in Europe, all that Europe wants to be in 10, 15, 20 years. There's something of that within the calls. But when we dive deeper, I could probably say that it's the trends from last year is what is trending right now. We have from the cybersecurity aspects. If we go in the future, there's something with post-quantum cryptography. There's a big European digital identity is also trending, at least in the digital sector. It's security. It's a lot of security because all of the cyber attacks and everything. So if something happens and Europe wants to be safe, number one, probably safety, cybersecurity safety is number one. I mean, it's not only digital, it's how to improve basically not only the safety of the digital space, but also the human space. So it's quite broad. But if I could summary down to one word, what's trending now is safety.
So actually, as I understand, this is the trend where the most of startups can actually be focused, and you can make business in that sector, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good idea actually, and I see a lot of people speaking about cybersecurity. I see even people who wants to change their profession, and we want to move to the cybersecurity sector because it's so trendy, and I see it from the business perspective right now, based on what the people are speaking right now, what is important to the market. And you're absolutely right. And let's say crypto space, we've seen a lot of cases when somebody was hacked, billions, millions of dollars was actually lost, and it's a critical thing.
It's as you mentioned, Darius, it's billions of dollars lost. Some of them is that money is European money, from European pockets. And the European Commission wants to stop that. Okay, why that happens? We have to, implement safety measures. As you probably know, that Europe is the most regulated continent in the world, not only digitally, everything, which is a good thing and a bad thing because it's quite safe, but the bad thing, it's slow. Sometimes it's cumbersome, and startups like speed.
Yeah, I agree.
So in a way, there's good and bad sides. Yeah, but that's Europe for you.
Vytenis, for people who wants to apply for the EU grant, what would be the key points, what we should know before we even apply?
Good question. So probably the main point is that you have to read what's within the calls, what the commission wants, what they want to be developed, what are the requirements. A lot of unsuccessful applications is from basically human error, is that they do not read the documents. It says that you need to be like established maybe 2 years, for example. It's the first layer of, or let's say the barrier of entry is no, read the documents. I know it's boring. Maybe you can summarize it, but if you're a EU established entity that has their company is fully European, let's say, then there's less barrier of entry. Or European related countries like Norway, Ukraine, I believe, some others.
Yeah.
But first is read the documents, what do you want? Then probably second one is see what type of calls there are, the incentives and everything. It's a lot. You have to track. It takes sometimes time, but you have to track what's on the radar, basically, what current open or forthcoming calls there are, and how can you apply for them, and what you need to do in them, or how can your product or service be implemented within these calls or included in these calls. Then again, it really depends. So read the documents, read the calls. Then what's important, as I mentioned before, is you 95% of the time cannot do it alone. So that means that you, again, probably 90% of the time, need 3 or more separate entities from 3 or more European or related countries. So partners, consortium members are essential for this. Europe wants cross-border cooperation. What you have to do is look for partners all around Europe. If you have one thing, look for partner that can do another thing within the call. Basically, you have to communicate you have to look, you have to network, do a lot of networking. European Commission definitely does info days on those calls. They facilitate the networking if possible, but you have to put in the work and do the networking to find those partners. And probably last but not least, is know how to write the application. If you're just starting out, there's two types of consortium members. But everyone's a beneficiary, but there's the main applicant and the other participants. So the main applicant is responsible for the whole management of the project and usually the writing. So, probably as a starter, let's say a startup or someone that's not as experienced with European projects, you will be participating just as a beneficiary. But that's how you learn how all the projects are written, what's the consortium, what it has to do, what is required. Just for the pointers, it's the last one is probably know how to write a good proposal. And maybe fifth
Okay.
one is don't leave everything on the last day.
Okay, yeah. Like students does, right? We do things at the last day before it needs to be done. Thank you very much for sharing those things. But I understand, it's easy to read, to find information online, with the help of AI. You even can simplify the data to make it easier to understand. I got this point that you need partners. But for majority of people, where we struggle, I believe, to do networking. So do you have any specific advice where I should find my partner, how I should network in order to get the partners? Do you have some specific advice on that?
So there's definitely the networking events done by the whole commission. There's info days, there's live events happening. A lot of this was all initiated by the European Commission. So definitely, go to those events. If possible, join those events. They do webinars, they do sessions, they do one-on-ones, matchmaking events. A lot of things happening within the commission itself. If you have a partner network throughout Europe, for example, you have one partner in one country, another in another. The barrier of entry for the European calls is basically if it's an established company, European owned, you can apply, free green as in inexperienced companies, can try and do the project. Of course, experience is very good to have, but I mean, if you have partners, talk with them. Maybe you see with the partners, have a chat with them. If you have those partners, say, okay, this is a call that's quite interesting. Maybe you want to join. If you're lacking a partner, see where you're strong at and try to fill in the gaps with other partners across Europe. Yeah.
And just really quick question, is it possible for the companies outside of Europe also to be applicable for the EU grants and funding, or it's not possible?
It is possible. Now let's say it's increasing the number of countries that are EU related or also participating countries. As I mentioned, Norway is one country, Ukraine is another. I believe Canada now is also
That's good.
can try and get the funding. Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken. So there's companies that can also join this type of funding. Of course, it's mostly European countries, but there's a few, I don't remember all of them, that can also participate within these calls.
Okay, Vytenis, so let's come back to BCCS Cluster. So what is your plan for the future? So what you are considering as your BCCS Cluster future in 2026 or let's say in 2027? Do you have any plans to expand the network globally? Maybe you are trying to get some partnerships.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Darius. Yeah, so we want to expand. We're building a few things in-house currently, as I mentioned, the platform. It will be quite an extensive platform with a lot of functionalities where you can communicate, where you can, share information, and not only. Again, it's still pending on the list of functionalities and what the platform will have, but this is done for having something more to offer to the cluster members. So, currently, if I'm what I mentioned is that we're quite small from the cluster perspective. We're only around 17 companies, but we want to reach at least next year a number which is more than 30 cluster members. So that's around a double increase. So we will start actively, searching for members, talking with partners, and where we want to be in those few years is to be a very strong community-based cluster where we will, let's say, be known as the place to be for fintech, Web3, and related companies, basically. So it's the big thing where we want to be, but small steps. And yes, we want to expand. We're mostly local now, but we want to expand Europe. And after Europe, we were looking for the Middle East, Asia. We'll see, on the capabilities. But for this and next year, we want to go big in Europe.
Okay, thank you. So just to end up, I really want to thank you that you actually came to my show, to my episode. I think everything what is related to funding, to the startups, to the growth, this is what is important for my community. And I really appreciate, Vytenis, that you spend your time. Really, it's so important for me, and it's going to be very useful for the community. And I wish you good luck with your business, what you do. And I hope some people who will be watching this episode, maybe we can get some ideas how you can actually work together. Thanks again for joining this episode.
Thank you, Darius, so much. Thanks for having me. So, again, very nice talk with you, and hopefully talk and see you later in the future.
Thank you very much
Thank
one
you
more
so
time.
much.
Take care.